I mentioned convenience earlier, things being convenient, and actually I was trying to figure out what to do tonight, and I was going back through all my old sermons, and this was actually the first sermon I ever did. Won't be exactly the same, but matter of fact, I filled in for Roscoe on a Sunday, and so what was really interesting about that for me was that when I sat down to actually write out the sermon, and this is what kind of gave me some idea that I had a calling of some sort that I certainly need to explore, but I was typing, and what was going through my head is not what came out on the screen. Something had come up, and I was upset about something, and in my head, had my Bible, and I was just beating this person, thumping them as hard as I could. And when I went back and I read what was on the screen, it was not what was going through my head at all. It was much calmer, much nicer. It was the Word of God. And I looked at it, and I thought about it, and I prayed, and I looked at it, and this is what you want me to say, God. This is what I'll say, and this is the way I'll say it. So when I go to that Sunday, the person I was thumping with the Bible wasn't even there. And matter of fact, half the congregation got up and left because somebody's grandmother or great aunt passed away. So my first sermon, and 100-something people, and half of them get up and leave. And, that was encouraging. But, so I did the sermon, and at the end of the sermon, I'm down there by the door, and I'm shaking hands, everybody's walking out. And one deacon looked at me, and when he went to shake my hand, he squeezed it as tight as he could. And he was an old mechanic, so he had a pretty good grip. And he looked me square in the eye, and he pulled me in close, and he said, "You sure stepped on a lot of toes today." And I thought about it, and I say all that just to say this, is that God knows who's going to be there and who's not going to be there. And if we allow God to give us the words that He would have us to say, it's going to touch somebody. It's going to reach some person. And that message apparently was intended for that individual. Not to say it didn't benefit anybody else, and not to say it won't benefit you guys tonight, but I like to get a little nerdy sometimes. I like to throw in definitions. A lot of us just use words and don't think about them. But Webster's defines convenient as suitable or favorable to one's comfort, purpose, or needs. I think about that at work and working in shipping department and having to maintain the warehouse, storage areas within the facility. And the production guys come in and put their stuff wherever it's convenient for them to put it. And when I go to try to do my job later, it actually makes it harder a lot of times. And they're just doing what's convenient for them because production has to run, things have to keep moving, and they can't get backed up. And I get it. Been there, done that. But we have a society full of conveniences. And, modern conveniences, ATMs, which I don't know how many of us use those much anymore with everything going cashless and the new tap-to-pay cards, or, even I was really disappointed to find out my cell phone, this new cell phone I have, doesn't support tap-to-pay. Like when you walk up and you just tap your phone on the little card swipey thing at the gas station or wherever you are. Yeah, this phone doesn't support that, so I was really disappointed. Now I actually have to go through the trouble of swiping my card. God, it's so hard. So ATMs, DVRs. I remember trying to program my VCR in the 80s to watch my favorite cartoons in case I slept too late. That was hard enough. Nowadays, you can set your DVR to record everything. Was that one company has 500 hours of recordable programming. Who has 500 hours to watch stuff. Good Lord. I grew up on microwavable dinners also. My mother worked 2 jobs. My parents were divorced, and I lived with my mother. And at night, I would have to microwave my dinner. And back then, they came in these little, and sometimes I couldn't even microwave them because they were in aluminum. The Hungry Man dinners came in those little aluminum trays. I had to stick them in the oven. And I grew up on those. I mentioned paying at the pump at the gas station. You don't know how much money a convenience store actually loses because people never go inside the store because they swipe their card at the pump. Nowadays, and we see this big time, online shopping. Whoever it is, Amazon or whatever the company is that's selling their stuff, Alibaba, whoever, order it today and get it tomorrow without even having to go down to the store. And of course, one of the newest conveniences they're really trying to push on us is mail-in voting. We see how that turned out, didn't we? So, and there's a long list. There's all kinds of different conveniences out there for us to supposedly make our lives easier. And, and thinking about it, we often, the old saying is idle hands are the devil's playground. The truth of the matter is it's idle mind is the devil's playground. And the more convenience we have, the more the easier it is for us to do everything, the more time we have left over to do God knows what. Which God really does, but we don't want anybody else to know, do we? So our idle minds become the devil's playground. And something we're dealing with right now, we're struggling, and granted, I'm doing this on social media right now, live, on Facebook, but online TV, or /TV in church. Now, granted, we got this whole COVID mess going on. I won't get into all the politics of it, but a lot of people either cannot or are scared to come out and go to church. They're scared to go this place or that place. And so there is some usefulness to some of these conveniences we have. And I'm not chastising anybody that has a legitimate reason for staying at home. And, there's always been some kind of shut-in somewhere. And whether it was the tape ministries years ago, so Roscoe and other pastors would make their tapes and take them down to nursing homes and they'd play them for the residents, or something of that nature. When Sharon and I lived in Pensacola, first year we were married, we attended Olive Baptist Church, which is the largest church membership-wise in that region down there, well over 10,000 members. Probably could call it a mega church. With a seating for 6,000, and the rest of them were shut-ins. They had a TV program going every Sunday and Wednesday night and whatnot, which great church, excellent pastor, really good Bible teacher. So there is some call and need for that type of thing, but how many people really need to stay at home? How many people really, there's people with anxiety issues. I know people like this. And it's anything they can do just to get in a crowd full of people. So I completely understand there are some people that really do need, something on TV or something on the internet. But then how many of the rest of us are just saying, well, I'll skip church tonight. I'll go and watch it I'll go back and watch it later. And you don't have a real good excuse for missing. I mean, I know we want to prioritize, but sometimes your job just doesn't let you show up every time the doors are open. I've been there and done that. But, we got to ask ourselves, though, do we really need all this stuff? I mean, high-speed internet, which, again, I grew up in the days of dial-up. Not that you young kids would understand that. Oh, you do? Okay. Some might. Okay. Dial-up. Which, I'll even go back a step further. Growing up in the ages of the Commodore 64 computer, and the modem was a whole separate thing, and you actually took your telephone off the receiver and hooked it up to this little speaker mechanism thing, and it played dial tones and stuff to actually transmit data. I mean, that was, you want to talk about really old dial-up, especially if you had a rotary phone. So, but, you know, what we have today, we always fuss and worry about how fast is our internet. You know, how fast does it go? Well, do you really have to have the information right then and there? Or is that truly just a convenience? You know, I'd hate to see some of us getting on dial-up. I know when my phone goes back to 3G and I'm trying to do something, it's frustrating because my apps are all designed for 4G, not 3G, so things run so much slower in the phone. And that is frustrating because I'm not used to that. But it's not something I need. And cell phones are a nice convenience. And don't get me wrong, I love being able to contact my wife, and she can contact me whenever. And of course, now my daughter has one, so I always know where she is. But there was a time when we didn't have that. You know, hey, Mom, I'm going to my friend's house. Call me when you get there. As I hop on my bicycle and ride several miles to my friend's house, and I have to call my mom. And that was a pain because she didn't have call waiting. It wasn't very convenient. And of course, another modern convenience that I need is online banking. My bank is actually, the closest branch for me is Montgomery. So I actually need to be able to get on my cell phone and do my banking transactions, deposit my checks, transfer money, that sort of thing. But, you know, and especially now with all this COVID stuff and banks are closed, you can't go in the lobby. So now you got to go through the drive-thru. Am I making an argument for the convenience now? I don't know. But the problem we have with convenience, though, is that we become lazy. You know, it's who grew up with farm-grown vegetables, homegrown vegetables in your garden or your farm, your yard. And I know Sharon always talked about growing up, but she never told anybody she was the smallest one, so she really didn't have to. She just had to stand there and hold the basket while her brothers and sisters did most of the work. But, and I'm sure she'll fuss at me later for telling on her about that. But how many folks out there think that all your groceries just come from the grocery store? You ever see those videos on YouTube or someplace on the social media, and it's some person complaining about, why are you doing that to that cow when you could just go to the grocery store and buy your beef at the grocery store? And I've never experienced slaughtering an animal of any kind for food, so I don't know exactly what that's like. All I've ever known is going to the grocery store. But, you know, it's... Do we honestly think the supermarket's always going to have food? No. We shouldn't, no, but we do, though. We don't think about it. Hey, we'll just run down to the grocery store. Sharon would fuss at me when I would do the grocery shopping because I'd always buy about 12 or 13, 14 or so extra cans of vegetables. We go to Aldi and their canned vegetables are really cheap. Don't need them. I'm just sitting there throwing them in the buggy walking down the aisle just in case, right? And that's another thing, too, canning your own stuff. Many people don't do that anymore because you can just buy it at the convenience store. You can buy it at the grocery store. So we become lazy, and, you know, we're not getting the exercise we need. We're counting on somebody else to provide for us. And I would dare say that in most cases, the mother of invention isn't necessity, but it's laziness. Remote controls. Who remembers the first remote controls? With the 10, 15, 20-foot cord. So you could sit on the couch and up and down your channels or up and down your volume. If you were lucky, you got the VCR with the remote. It was that Far Side comic of the evolution of man if the remote control hadn't been invented and it was some kid sitting on the couch with a 10-foot long arm changing the channel. But we end up with all this convenience in our lives. We end up developing an attitude of convenience. We want everything to be easy. We want to throw that meal in the microwave. We want to jump in the car and go. So we want to order it now and have it delivered tomorrow, or even the same day if you order it in time, depending on where you are. And our Christianity gets affected in it. We want it to be convenient, and it becomes like a light switch. Anybody here not have power in their home? Running water?
Right now or past?
In the past. I mean, like a house that actually
No plumbing?
was built with no plumbing, used an outhouse.
Halfway.
Closest I've ever come to that is a porta potty, and I'm thankful for those. But, it's the same concept. They're just portable. But we treat our Christianity like a light switch. And it becomes convenient in our lives. Well, now it feels like a good time to be a Christian, so I think I'll act right. No one's looking, I can turn the switch off. And we treat church like that. Church becomes a convenience. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll watch it later. We'll go back and watch it later. And like I said, I do that I put these out there on social media for people who are working or have a legitimate reason not to be here or can't watch right now. But if you're just sitting at home, why can't you go to church? If you're not sick, if your vehicle's not broken down, and even if it is broken down, don't you have a neighbor or a friend or somebody you can call to give you a ride? So what happens to our lives with convenience? And then the lies we tell ourselves to justify our convenience. In Proverbs 30, verses 8 and 9, it says, "Remove far from me falsehood and lying. Give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food that is needful for me, lest I be full and deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God." Doesn't the Bible tell us that a man who doesn't work doesn't eat? I will say this, and if you go back and you start studying about the life of David and whatnot, the only thing God allows you to steal is food if you are truly hungry. If you truly need it and you are starving to death, God will forgive you for stealing food. But why should anybody have to steal food these days? There's always somebody out there who lets you work for a meal. They'll let you work for a few dollars. You can go buy a meal. Fast food with convenience, right? Fast food restaurants in every corner. And we're all, how far overweight? Ooh, I'll leave that one alone. When we look at our lives and we look at our Christianity and we look at our faith, and we want Christianity to be easy. Nobody likes anything that hurts us. Nobody likes pain. I can tolerate it, but I don't like it. I don't want to deal with it if I don't have to. But the reality to life is that life is painful. And Christ told us being a Christian would not be easy. You go back and read about Abraham. Lived in a tent. God said, get your stuff and just go. Had no idea where he was going. Only knew that God told him to do it. So he packed up everything and left. Didn't know what direction to go in. There's nothing convenient about that. He had to dig wells. He had to dig for water. Can you imagine that today? How many folks out there would make it very far if God said, go out and go west, young man? Moses took him 80 years to get to the point where he led the Israelites out into the desert for 40 years and had to listen to them complain the whole time as they walked in circles, collecting manna to eat. There's nothing convenient about that. Or Jonah. Now, he did that to himself, to be honest. But, it's Job. That was done to him. There was nothing. The convenient thing for Job would have been to curse God and die, like his wife told him to. But he didn't do that. He didn't choose the convenient thing. What about the apostles? I would say that some of them did do the convenient thing the night that Christ was crucified, but they learned their lesson. They were redeemed, and life after that became much harder for them. Persecution, beatings. How many times did Paul get beaten in the square for preaching the gospel and drawing people away from false religions and causing idol makers to lose money and temples to lose money? It eventually cost him his head. Nothing convenient about that. So find me somebody in the Bible, please. Somebody out there somewhere. Find me in the Bible where somebody led a convenient life. There wasn't anything convenient about what Christ did. He made the inconvenient choice, and I thank God for that. Without his death, burial, and resurrection, we wouldn't have salvation. We wouldn't have access to heaven. We wouldn't have access directly to God. The Old Testament priests, the Levites. Again, go back and read Levitical law. What did they have to do to prepare themselves for worship? Now, I do thank God that all I have to do is throw my clothes on and get in the car and drive over here. The last church that I was a member at, we had one of the older deacons, probably the eldest deacon. He would get up and sing a song called "Giddy Up Mule." If you haven't heard it, you can look it up. I found it on YouTube. He couldn't find any music for this anywhere. It's so old. All you can find are these really old recordings of it. And there's 3 or 4 of them on YouTube. But the song talks about waiting at the brush arbor for the pastor to come in, and he was only going to come to that one spot in town. So everybody, all the families that wanted to go to church, loaded up the mule, hitched up the mule to the buggy, and rode that to the brush arbor to hear the pastor preach. That elder deacon, Brother Danny, lived that. And to learn that about him, to watch this man, he was inspiring to say the least. And there was always something about him that just drew me to him, to respect him and to look up to him. But to find out that that's how he went to church. I grew up in the city, lived at the beach. I've always ridden in a car somewhere. I've ridden horses, so I understand, about riding a horse, but to say that's your regular mode of transportation, or that's all you could afford, was a mule and a buggy, and that's how your family traveled. There's no convenience there, and people say, I can't make it to church tonight. It's... Where's your faith? How convenient is your faith? It would have been a lot more convenient for me after a long day of work and getting up at 4 a.m. this morning to tell Roscoe I couldn't be here tonight. And I appreciate it right now. My church is within 6 minutes of my house, but prior to that, every church that I attended was over 20 miles away. I couldn't imagine trying to walk that far or do a horse and a mule and a buggy or even ride a horse for that matter, 20 miles just to go to church. I thank God for my car. But the problem, I mean, it's bad enough for us as individuals to get accustomed to our conveniences. But the even worse thing about that is encouraging others to do the same. Matter of fact, when I first did this, and the instance that was going on in my head was somebody had come to church, taken people out of church to go home and watch movies. You want to skip out on church, that's your business. That's between you and God. But when you go and start dragging other people into your sin, there's a problem. I have sin in my life. I have issues that I deal with. I have demons that I deal with. Some days I struggle with it. Some days I don't, unfortunately. But I would dare not ever bring anybody along with me. I will answer for my actions and my actions alone. I do not want to be that guy standing before God having to deal with other people's. I got enough problems. So I will never encourage another person to sin or to miss out on church. It would just be highly irresponsible with me. Romans 14:13 tells us, therefore, let us not pass judgment on one another any longer, but rather decide never to put a stumbling block or hindrance in the way of a brother. We ought to think about that as we go about our daily lives as Christians, especially when you get out there talking to other Christians and trying to share the faith or share the gospel or something. I like to get into apologetics and getting into studying the scientific side of things and understanding the universe. And there's only so much you can understand, but a lot of it does support what's in the Bible. And the more we learn, the more it actually shows us the Bible is true. And in teaching, when I had college and career class a couple of years ago, we were studying apologetics, and what I have figured out over the years is that I will actually spend more time arguing apologetics with fellow believers than I will non-believers. And I'm always looking for a conversation. I'm always looking for a discussion, a debate. Respectful, of course. I don't want to argue or yell and scream. I say that an argument is not a bad thing, because an argument is just a discussion from both sides of the viewpoint. But I don't want to yell and scream or insult anybody, and unfortunately a lot of people do that. But to try and, like I was saying, I was trying to thump that person in the head with my Bible. God said there's a better way. So if you want to teach other people what your theology is, if you want to teach other people what you believe, first thing is you got to meet them where they're at. You got to find out what they know. You got to find out where they are spiritually. I mentioned that the other day we fall into two camps really these days, and I like to oversimplify this just to make a point. Calvinism versus Arminianism. Now, modern Calvinism is not quite right. Arminianism is not quite right. But they're the far ends of the same, opposite ends of the coin. Calvinism, to oversimplify it, basically says that you treat everybody like they're going to heaven and you just teach the Bible. Arminianism says you treat everybody like they're going to hell and all you do is preach salvation. There's a problem there. Not everybody's at the same point spiritually or in their spiritual maturity as the next person. And if I stand across from a Christian of 25 plus years, and I just sit there and try to preach the gospel to them in salvation, I'm not going to get very far. Chances are they're already there. But on the same token, if I come across someone who is not saved, and I want to sit there and get into word studies, and I did that today, getting into debating, ran into this guy on social media that didn't think Christians go to heaven. Not that there wasn't salvation, but that there is no heaven. Christians can't go there because God's there. And we're going back and forth on this. And again, having apologetics with a fellow believer, right? Discussing and arguing the Bible with a fellow believer. And I had to go back to the original Greek. In Revelation chapter 21, verses 1 and 2. I said, in the Greek, the word for heaven here is plural. It doesn't get translated as plural. But then you go to the next verse, and it's the word for heaven, which is urano, is singular. And I'm nerding out here, but, I'm sitting there arguing with the guy. And that's what it is. But he would rather sit there and say, I'm right, you're wrong. And it's my way or the highway. And that, I'm sorry, I'm not going to go watch all your videos because, quite frankly, you're rude. And don't sit there and tell me that, well, the truth is people don't like the truth. Well, people who are not seeking the truth don't like it. But people who are seeking the truth do like it, and at this point, I haven't heard the truth yet. So, but I think his theology is way off. He might have the salvation part right, but we have to know what we believe. We have to study. We have to show ourselves approved, and we have to commit to not becoming a stumbling block for other believers. I would hate for that guy to come across someone who just got saved, because he's going to confuse the you-know-what out of them, and they may quit going to church. They may never truly find out what it really, truly means to be saved. I would hope not. I would hope they didn't get discouraged because he's rambling on about God knows what. It's... it's really, really simple. Wherever God is, that's where heaven is. So in Revelation 21, when it talks about New Jerusalem coming out of the clouds, and that's where God's going to be, and we're going to be his people, and we're going to live with God in eternity forever, that sounds like heaven to me. But don't ever encourage anyone else to be convenient. Our nation is in we have issues in our nation. And it's about convenience. People would rather have somebody else do the work for them rather than do the work themselves. I think about when my father was an officer in Germany, and he ran a supply warehouse. He was quartermaster. And his guys would spend all day trying to get out of work, and they would sit in line at the clinic claiming they didn't feel well, and they would spend 8, 9, 10 hours when there was only 5 or 6 hours worth of work. They could have got it knocked out and done and had time to go do whatever, but they would spend more time trying to get out of work than actually doing it. So don't encourage others to be convenient. There's a list. There's a lot of things that are convenient to do. The easiest, simplest way, the cheapest way. Yeah, we have credit problems in America. People are so deep in credit debt, beyond their mortgages. And even that in of itself. Borrower, slave to the lender. That's where convenience gets you. So let's be an encouragement to others and not a stumbling block. Let's not make our Christianity convenient. Let's do it the hard way, like Christ did, like the apostles did.